early returns and word they're hearing from their folks in the field is adding to that upbeat mood. Now, the one down spot is how tight this race is in Florida. That's a state they thought they would win. In fact, at first thought they had to win. But now they're looking at this and saying that this is where their strategy of challenging the Democrats in those traditionally Democratic states is paying off, because they now see that perhaps they can piece together a victory without Florida. Now, it's cold and rainy here in Austin, but it hasn't dampened the mood coming from the folks here. Dan?
John Roberts is covering Vice President Gore in Nashville. John, are the Gore people a little concerned now about the turnout in Pennsylvania, said not to be so large from their general constituents, or are they pretty upbeat?
Well, Jan, you know, the vice president is a nail-biter. He's famous for that, and this is definitely a nail-biter of historic proportions. What they're saying about Philadelphia is that they're expecting the vote to come in late there, but they're expecting the voter turnout to be large. So far, they're pretty happy about what they see in 4 states, Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Minnesota. They say that election officials in South Florida have told them that they're looking at record voter turnout there, and that's crucial if they want to carry that state. But they do say that if they get all 4 of those states, they still need 9 electoral votes to get to 270. So that means either winning Washington State or Wisconsin, or some combination of perhaps Oregon, Iowa, New Hampshire, or New Mexico, something to get them 9 more electoral votes. But they told me tonight that if they lose any one of those 4 states, it's going to be very difficult to make this work in their favor. Dan?
John Roberts in Nashville. Now, take a look at the map. So far, George Bush has jumped out to lead by carrying South Carolina, Kentucky. That's a turnover for the Democrats. That's a reason for the Republicans. That's the reason the light is blinking. The Democrats carried it the last time, and Bush has carried Indiana. So far, Gore has only carried Vermont. The polls are closed, but no results, definitive results are in. In Florida, 25 electoral votes, Georgia 13, and in Virginia 13, and in New Hampshire 4. Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York.
This is an ABC News special, The 2000 Vote. Now reporting from New York, Peter Jennings.
Welcome back to our coverage of Election 2000, ABC News election headquarters here in Times Square in New York. As we promised, an exciting evening. The polls have now closed in 3 more states. The polls have already closed in a total of 11 states. They've now closed in 3 more states, so we're going to at least give you some information based on the information we have. Projections are not necessarily projections, but let's go to the presidential race in Virginia, where we now project that in Virginia the winner is Mr. Bush. It's always been strongly Republican in presidential politics, despite its proximity to Washington, D.C. It's a southern state, and we project that Mr. Bush is the winner. We also project, we project that Ohio is too close to call. 21 electoral votes there, crucial state in presidential politics, especially for the GOP. No Republican has ever been elected president without carrying Ohio. In Georgia, we are now able to project that George W. Bush is the winner in Georgia, 13 electoral votes. That is not an enormous surprise tonight, but we project that winner based on the information we now currently have. Let's go now to West Virginia. West Virginia is also too close to call. This is one of the Dukakis 6 states we'll talk to George Stephanopoulos about, voted for every Democrat in West Virginia since 1960, but one in 1984. It is currently for us too close to call. In North Carolina, where Mr. Gore did not campaign very vigorously, Mr. Clinton barely lost it in 92, but did worse in 96 when he lost by 5 points. We now believe that North Carolina, based on the information we have, is too close to call. Now here's what the electoral vote total looks like so far. 54 for Mr. Bush and 3 for Mr. Gore. And there is our national map, which tells you red for Mr. Bush, blue for Mr. Gore. That's Vermont up there in the northeast corner for Mr. Gore. And the white are states in which we currently believe it is too close to call. Now here is the popular vote. We can give that to you in a variety of ways, but with 43%, not quite sure how that one's worked out with, oh, I see, Mr. Gore currently has 43% of the popular vote, and Mr. Bush, I think, has 55%. Don't know exactly how much is reporting throughout the nation, but at this moment, this is a fairly meaningless figure. But as you know, right up to election time, we have been talking ad nauseum about the possibility there might be a popular win for Mr. Bush and an electoral win for Mr. Gore, but it is much too early in the evening to begin talking seriously about that. couple of governor races now in which we wish to make a projection. Here is North Carolina, where the Democratic governor, Jim Hunt, was term limited. And we project that the Democrat, Attorney General Mike Easley, who's led throughout the campaign, is in fact the projected winner in North Carolina. In Vermont, we project that the incumbent governor, Howard Dean, who's been governor since 1992, he was seeking a 5th term, has been re-elected. Between him and Ruth Dwyer, this is basically a rematch of the 1998 governor's race. We give it to Governor Dean. And now here are the map on the governor's race. There are 11 governor's races throughout the country. 30 in the country are currently held by Republicans, 18 by Democrats, and 2 independents. And that's what that map looks like tonight. 3 Democrats, no particular gain there as of now. But I want to go to George Stephanopoulos again. You were talking about West Virginia a moment ago, and I didn't quite hear what you were saying.
Well, West Virginia should be, as you said, a solidly Democratic state. It's got a huge registration advantage, but it's also a state that depends on coal mining. And I think what you're seeing here, the reason Al Gore is having so much trouble, it shows the perils of incumbency. The Clinton administration took efforts to discourage open pit mining in West Virginia over the last 8 years, and you can see the effects in our exit polls today. Al Gore is only winning half of the union vote. United Mine Workers in West Virginia.
Big force in the state, of course.
Big force, 28,000 miners. It should be much higher than that. And secondly, 6 out of 10 voters in the state of West Virginia say they would prefer a pro-growth candidate to a pro-green candidate. 6 out of 10 of them, according to our exit polls, are going to George W. Bush.
The environmental issue is huge all over the country, and one of the things we haven't talked about yet, which we'll get to in a little while, is the Nader factor. But leading the Green Party there, he may or may not attract environmentalists, which may make a difference.
It's absolutely true, and it's in those other states, it's cutting the other way. Nader is attracting votes in places like Oregon and Washington because people say Al Gore wasn't pro-green enough.
Exactly. Let's go to Sam Donaldson, who has a projection in the Senate. Sam.
That's right, Peter. In the important battle for the Senate, the Democrats have just picked up an important seat in Florida. It was an open seat. Connie Mack, the Republican, was retiring. ABC News projects that Bill Nelson, the insurance commissioner, a Democrat, has won that race against Bill McCollum, who is a member of Congress, a member of the House of Representatives, and was a Republican nominee. Very important switch here. We have another projection to make, in fact, 2 more, Peter. In Ohio, ABC News projects that Mike DeWine, the first-term Republican senator, has won there, beating Ted Celeste, who is the brother of a former popular Ohio Democratic governor. And in Ohio, Peter, this is the first time a Republican senator has been re-elected since 1952. His name was Taft then. Also, we have a projection for West Virginia. In West Virginia, ABC News projects that Robert Byrd, the venerable Robert Byrd, first came to the Senate in 1958, has beaten the contractor David Gallagher. Now, this is interesting. All the groups in West Virginia, according to our exit poll information, voted for Byrd, including half the Republicans. Because remember, Peter,
the power of incumbency.
Byrd has papered that state with federal dollars. He has moved federal agencies to West Virginia that didn't even know it existed before he got the jobs there. So if you were in West Virginia, you wanted a job, you're voting for Byrd.
I want to come back and talk to Cokie Rob. We ever going to let you sit down this evening? Just stand there?
I move. I
want to come back and talk to Cokie in just a moment about the House in Florida, because I'm not sure we haven't got Florida just a little bit jumbled first. But first of all, I want to go to Lynn Scherr to give us some sense, Lynn, if you would, of what the demographics are showing us in Florida.
Peter, we have been talking all year long about the gender gap. It is here again, big time. The gender gap, as you know, of course, is the difference between the way men vote and women vote. Let's take a look at the numbers and see what's happening here today. Let's start with the male vote. 52% of that vote went for George Bush today, is going for Mr. Bush, only 42% for Mr. Gore. That's a difference of 10 points. Now let's take a look at the women's vote. Here we go. Just flip the numbers and you will see that Mr. Gore is getting 53% of the vote. Mr. Bush only 43% of the vote. That adds up to a 20-point gender gap. It could be the largest since we started tracking all of this back in 1980. And Peter, the reason is that men consistently want smaller government. Fewer women are so sure about it.
Lynn, how many questions, I've forgotten, do we have overall on our entire exit poll questionnaire?
Well, there are 3 national questionnaires, Peter, and there is one for every state. So on each of the 3 national polls, there's around 24 or 30. So we have a lot of questions that we're asking all these voters today.
Great, thank you very much. There are an enormous amount of questions on some of the ballots around the country. We were feeling a little envious earlier today of the voters in Oregon who had a chance to do it by mail this year. Turnout apparently, or the turn-in, has been extraordinarily high, but they did have that time to sit around at home and discuss all of the issues that were on the ballot that some people had to do when they went into the voting booth today. We'll talk to Cokie Roberts in just a moment about Florida. I hope you'll stay with us as we continue with ABC Election 2000.
Take the ABC News American Election Challenge. In which state have the greatest number of presidents been born? Texas, Virginia, New York, Massachusetts. This ABC News special is being brought to
Battleground states, Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan. They also include Maine, New Hampshire, West Virginia, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Wisconsin, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington. All of those considered to be big battleground states. We're waiting on a possible decision in Florida, but you got time to put on another cup of coffee.
Massachusetts. This ABC News special is being brought to
Battleground states, Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan. They also include Maine, New Hampshire, West Virginia, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Wisconsin, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington. All of those considered to be big battleground states. We're waiting on a possible decision in Florida, but you got time to put on another cup of coffee and pour it, because in Florida, it's generally considered to be so close that it may be a long while before anybody's able to call it. Bill Whitaker is in Texas, in Austin, with Governor Bush. That is to say that you've seen Governor Bush lately, have you, Bill?
Well, Dan, just a short while ago, George W. Bush went to a local hotel where he's going to watch the returns. He gave a thumbs up showing how confident he is. He was accompanied by his father, former President Bush, and his mother, Barbara Bush. Now, he understandably is feeling good about the numbers that are coming in. But we must understand that the states that have come in so far are states that George W. Bush expected to win. For the most part, there are no surprises here. Now, what we have to wait for are these great big battleground states where both candidates have been concentrating most of their attention. George W. Bush can't really feel comfortable until he starts to hear those returns coming from those big states. Dan?
Thanks, Scott.
Just need that.
Bill Whitaker, thanks. Electoral vote, 54-3. Bush leads Gore. In the popular vote, remember it's still early in the evening, it's about 55-43. And this is the way the electoral map looks at this moment, with Bush leading 54-3 in the electoral votes. I want you to know, keep emphasizing it, Florida, the polls have closed, no decision yet there. North Carolina, 14 electoral votes, polls have closed, no decision there. Same story, third verse actually in Ohio, 21 electoral votes, polls have closed, no decision yet. West Virginia with 5, polls have closed, no verdict there yet. And same story up in New Hampshire with 4 electoral votes. Now, Bob Schieffer, they intend to keep the polls open in St. Louis. That could be good news for the Democrats.
Oh, I think it's good news for the Democrats on 2 counts, because that's where the big Democratic vote is, in that weird Senate race where Governor Mel Carnahan's widow, Carnahan's on the ballot. The governor says he'll appoint the widow if Carnahan wins, because as we know, he was killed in a plane crash. So keeping it open, that's a big help to the Carnahan supporters. I would say also a big help for Al Gore.
We'll see as the evening goes along. Bush right now leads in the Electoral College 54-3 with 270 needed to win. Stay here with us. Our CBS News election night coverage will continue in just a moment.
Faced a serious challenge. And the Democrats seem to be doing well in Florida. We've called the Senate race for the Democratic candidate there. So these are very important seats to the Democrats. The polls are closed. We don't have any results yet, and so we don't quite know what the situation is going to be with those seats. But it's so important to keep in mind that these open seats are where you can really make a difference. For instance, in West Virginia, where there is an open seat. It looks like it's a very, very close race, and Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican, could be winning this open seat from the Democrat who has had it before, Bob Wise, who's running for governor. That's despite the fact that the Democratic candidate, Jim Humphreys, has spent about $5 million of his own money in a very poor state. Still, it's a very, very close race. But Sam has some real news here.
Yeah,
I want to